He was forced out of his first-class seat, accused of theft in front of the entire cabin, not because of anything he did, but because he was black. The watch wasn't missing. There was no evidence. Just a glance from a flight attendant, a whisper between crew, and moments later, 2 security officers dragging him toward the exit like a criminal. People watched. Some recorded. No one intervened. They didn't see a passenger. They saw a threat. What they didn't know was that they had just humiliated the wrong man. This isn't just a flight. It's the moment arrogance meets justice and loses. Before we go any further, like this video, subscribe for more stories that hit hard, and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what part of this made your jaw drop? Because when the truth finally takes off, no one gets to land the same. Marcus Harris boarded Flight 716 with the quiet confidence of someone who had worked twice as hard to get half as far, and still stood taller. Dressed in a navy wool suit and dark Oxford shoes polished to a mirror shine, he looked every bit the executive he was. His silver watch caught the light as he adjusted his cuff, stepping past the threshold of first class, nodding politely to a flight attendant near the galley. It was Rebecca Summers. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She scanned passengers like she was hunting for irregularities, and when she saw Marcus, her eyes paused. Just for a second, long enough for a silent verdict to be passed. She didn't greet him, didn't smile, just watched. Marcus moved to seat 2A, stowed his briefcase in the overhead compartment, and settled in. No sooner had he opened his tablet than he heard it. "Sir," Rebecca said. Her tone was firm but coated with false politeness. "May I see your boarding pass?" Marcus looked up, momentarily surprised. "Is there an issue?" "Just standard protocol," she replied. But it wasn't. He'd flown this route before. Watched 5 passengers walk past her seconds ago, unbothered, unchecked. He handed it over anyway. She scanned it, hesitated, then gave a tight nod. "You're in the right seat." "I know," Marcus said simply, reclaiming the pass. She turned and walked away, but her eyes stayed cold. The energy had shifted. He could feel it. 5 minutes passed. Rebecca returned, pretending to adjust the curtain that separated first class from business. But she wasn't looking at the fabric. She was watching him. Then came the commotion. A woman in 1C let out a gasp. "My watch," she said, fingers trembling near her wrist. "It's gone." "It was right here." Rebecca rushed over, leaning down. "A watch, ma'am." "Yes. My Cartier. Rose gold. I took it off during boarding and placed it on the tray. I went to the restroom and now—" "Don't worry," Rebecca said smoothly. "We'll get to the bottom of it." Her eyes darted back toward Marcus like a reflex. "We'll start by checking around nearby seats." She didn't ask anyone else. She walked straight to Marcus. "Sir, would you mind standing up for a moment?" Marcus blinked. "Excuse me. We've had a report of a missing item. It's best if we check the area." "So check," he said, not moving. "But why am I the only one you're asking to stand?" "This is not an accusation," she said too quickly. "Just a precaution." "For whom?" he asked. "Because I'm the only black man in first class." A few passengers turned at the edge in his voice. Rebecca stiffened, as if suddenly aware of being watched. She stepped back slightly. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, I'll have to involve the captain." "Please do," Marcus said, his voice low, steady. "Let's make this as public as possible." Another attendant appeared, Melissa, younger, clearly uncomfortable. She leaned toward Rebecca and whispered something. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "Fine," she muttered, brushing past Marcus. "We'll return to this." But the tension had already been planted like a landmine. Whispers rolled through the cabin. The woman in 1C kept glancing back at Marcus with suspicion. A man across the aisle shifted his laptop slightly, as if guarding it. Marcus sat still, hands folded, jaw clenched. He stared straight ahead. He wasn't surprised, just tired. Across the aisle, a flight attendant named Caleb stepped forward, whispering urgently into Rebecca's ear. She nodded once and disappeared behind the galley curtain. Seconds later, she returned, not alone. 2 uniformed security personnel trailed her, their expressions unreadable but posture rigid. The taller of the two, a man with cropped gray hair and a tight jawline, stepped into the aisle with practiced authority. "Sir," he said, voice low but firm, "we've received a report of a missing item. We'd like to ask you to step off the plane for a quick conversation." Marcus didn't move. His voice was calm, deliberate. No one asked the man in 3A to step off the plane. No one asked to search anyone else's area. "Why me?" The officer shifted slightly, uneasy. "We're not accusing you of anything, Mr. Harris. This is just procedure." "Funny how procedure always seems to follow me," Marcus replied, then slowly stood, careful not to make any sudden moves. Every passenger in first class was watching now, their stares no longer discreet. A few even pulled out phones, pretending to scroll while recording. A younger woman in 1B, probably mid-20s, earbuds in, boldly turned her camera toward the scene, capturing Marcus standing calmly, surrounded by flight crew and security. Rebecca's eyes flicked toward her, her voice suddenly sharper. "Ma'am, I'll have to ask you to stop recording. It's against FAA regulations to film security procedures on board." "That's not a real rule," the woman responded without looking away. "I know my rights." Rebecca stepped closer. "I'm authorized to demand you delete that video for safety reasons." The woman laughed softly. "You're not worried about safety. You're worried about going viral." Marcus glanced at her briefly, nodding once in silent gratitude. The taller officer gestured toward the exit. "Mr. Harris, please. This won't take long." Marcus met his gaze, then slowly reached for his carry-on. He moved with measured grace, refusing to be rushed or rattled. As he stepped into the aisle, a middle-aged man in 4A muttered just loud enough to be heard, "If you've got nothing to hide, why not just cooperate?" Marcus turned his head slightly. "I've been cooperating my whole life," he said. "The results never seem to change." The officer cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. Together, they walked down the aisle, passing rows of silent, blinking faces. Rebecca followed a few steps behind, arms folded, jaw clenched with smug satisfaction barely hidden beneath her professional mask. In the galley, Marcus was asked to place his bag on the counter, while the second officer, blonde, younger, silent, gloved up and began to unzip the compartments. Marcus watched, arms crossed, as his personal items were examined. Nothing was out of place. No watch, no evidence, no reason. After several awkward minutes, the lead officer exhaled. "There's nothing here." "Of course there's nothing here," Marcus replied, his tone clipped. "There was never anything to find." He looked at Rebecca. "Would you like to apologize now, or would you prefer to wait until your manager's in the room?" Rebecca said nothing. Her lips were tight, her arms tighter. The officer gave a small nod. "You're free to return to your seat, sir." But Marcus didn't move. No, not yet. He pulled out his phone, opened his contacts, and scrolled. The moment the line connected, his voice dropped an octave, quiet but firm. "Carl, it's Marcus. I need aviation legal to flag a developing situation. Yes, Flight 716. First class. I want a record pulled on crew assignments and passenger interactions from the last 2 hours. Start internal." Then he hung up, locked eyes with Rebecca, and walked back to his seat without another word. As he returned to his row, something in the atmosphere shifted. Passengers moved slightly out of his way. The woman who'd recorded earlier gave him a nod. The man in 3A now avoided his gaze. When Marcus sat down, he exhaled slowly. He wasn't humiliated. He was angry. And now he was documenting. Rebecca didn't return to his row. Instead, she whispered with another attendant in the galley, her shoulders tense, her eyes flicking toward him more often than before. For the next 10 minutes, the plane sat still, the boarding process delayed, the door open, the tension unresolved. A man 2 rows back asked loudly, "Are we going to take off today, or is this still amateur hour?" He made a beeline for Marcus's row and leaned toward him, without even greeting the crew. "Mr. Harris," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." Now, Marcus didn't react at first. The passengers around him turned like dominoes falling into formation, their eyes fixed on the scene unfolding in front of them like a made-for-TV scandal. "On what grounds?" Marcus asked, his voice smooth but steady as stone. "We've been asked to escalate. A theft report has been filed, and protocol requires a secondary search off-board," the officer explained, almost apologetic, but firm. "By whom?" Marcus pressed. "Crew, and first-class passenger 1C. The woman with the missing Cartier, Rebecca, standing 2 rows back, crossed her arms as if to punctuate her silent approval. Marcus inhaled slowly, not in fear, but in fury dressed as restraint. "Very well," he said after a beat, standing with composure. "Let's make this the spectacle they clearly want it to be." He took his carry-on from the overhead bin, but the officer stopped him. "Leave the bag," he said. "We'll search it in place. For transparency." "You mean for humiliation," Marcus corrected. "You want the crowd to see." The officer didn't respond. Instead, he turned and gestured to a nearby flight attendant. "Open it. Here." The flight attendant, nervous and young, approached Marcus's bag with visible hesitation, unzipping it slowly while Marcus stood beside her, shoulders square, eyes locked ahead like a man awaiting judgment. The zipper hissed open. Out tumbled a neatly folded blazer, a laptop, a binder marked confidential, and beneath it, a stack of carefully organized personal documents. A few slid out and scattered across the floor. One of them was a hand-drawn picture, a child's drawing, crayons, a stick figure version of Marcus holding hands with a small girl. Underneath it, a note in shaky handwriting. "Good luck, Daddy. You're the bravest man I know. Love, Jada." It landed near the aisle. The same man from 3A, the smirking, white-haired executive, leaned forward, chuckling softly. "Guess all that class doesn't come with dignity, huh?" he muttered. "First-class ticket, third-class character." The comment hit like a slap, not just for Marcus, but for every silent observer whose eyes widened just slightly. The young woman who had tried to record earlier clenched her fists. Even the flight attendant handling the bag froze for half a second before gathering the papers. Marcus bent down slowly and picked up the note himself, brushing off a scuff that hadn't been there a second ago. When he rose, his expression had changed, not furious, not shaken, but colder, sharper, like something in him had clicked into focus. He looked directly at Rebecca. "This is the last time I fly silent," he said. "You've just filed your resignation letter. You just don't know it yet." She didn't flinch, but she blinked. Once, twice. The officer beside Marcus cleared his throat again. "We're wasting time," he muttered. "Sir, if you please." Marcus nodded once and followed him toward the exit. As he passed the rows, the whispers surged again. Some were filled with pity, others with voyeuristic satisfaction. One man muttered under his breath, "This is why we need stricter screenings." Another woman clutched her purse a little tighter as he passed. But not everyone looked away in disgust. A passenger from row 5, a man in a rumpled suit with a press badge clipped to his coat, quietly turned on his phone camera and began to record, not covertly, but openly. As Marcus stepped off the plane and into the jet bridge, the lights overhead flickered slightly, a momentary glitch in the system. Inside, Rebecca stood frozen, her gaze locked on the empty space Marcus had just left behind. The young attendant who had handled the bag lingered, then gently picked up the crayon note Marcus had dropped and placed it in the front pocket of the bag, before closing it with more care than before. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and for the first time, the weight of what had just occurred hung in the air, with no one able to make eye contact. Because this wasn't just protocol. It wasn't just suspicion. His mind had shifted into another gear, no longer the subject of humiliation, but now the architect of response. Back in the cabin, the energy had soured. First class was no longer calm and indulgent. It was tense, conflicted, and uncomfortably aware of its own silence. A few rows behind Marcus's vacated seat, a man named Daniel Tran adjusted his glasses and leaned slightly forward in his seat. Daniel wasn't loud, wasn't confrontational, but he had noticed something no one else seemed to catch, or at least no one else dared to mention. 10 minutes before the missing watch was reported, he'd seen Grace, one of the junior flight attendants, walking quickly toward the galley, holding what looked unmistakably like a rose gold Cartier watch in her gloved hand. At the time, he thought nothing of it. Lost and found, probably. Passengers misplace things all the time. But when the accusation fell squarely on Marcus, and the sequence unfolded with cold precision, Daniel's memory started to itch. He glanced toward the galley where Grace now stood, shoulders tense, arms wrapped tightly across her chest as she faced away from the rest of the cabin. Her body language screamed discomfort. Gathering his courage, Daniel rose and approached, stopping just short of the galley entrance. "Excuse me," he said gently, so as not to startle her. Grace turned, startled anyway. Her eyes widened when she saw who it was, not because she recognized him, but because he wasn't crew, and he had gotten close. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Daniel said, lowering his voice, "but earlier, before all this started, I saw you holding a watch. Rose gold. Cartier. Was that the same one that was reported missing?" Grace's expression shifted instantly. The neutral smile faltered. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Daniel continued, gently but persistently, "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want to know the truth." Grace looked around, ensuring Rebecca wasn't nearby. Then she nodded, just once. "Yes," she whispered. "It was the same one." "So it was found?" Daniel pressed, keeping his voice calm. Grace's eyes dropped to the floor. "It was never lost," she whispered. "Seat 1C left it on the counter in the lounge before boarding. Someone turned it in. Rebecca knew. But what?" Grace swallowed hard, her jaw tense. She said, she had a feeling that he was up to something. She didn't need to explain who he was. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of that settle. "She made the accusation based on nothing." Grace nodded. "I didn't agree with it. But she's seen your crew. She said it's better to err on the side of caution." "Caution," Daniel repeated softly. "That wasn't caution. That was character assassination." Grace didn't respond. Her eyes glistened, but she turned quickly and walked toward the back of the galley before Rebecca could return. Daniel stood there for a moment, processing, then slowly returned to his seat. But not before glancing toward the overhead camera nestled between the lights above row 2. He tapped open his email and began typing a message. Subject: Formal Passenger Observation Flight 716. He included the timestamp, a brief description of what he saw, and the names of both Grace and Rebecca. He wasn't sure if it would help, but it felt like the first right thing anyone on board had done all morning. Meanwhile, Rebecca stood in the forward cabin, speaking quietly to the woman from 1C. Her posture was confident again, smugness returning in waves. "Security handled it professionally," she was saying. "Hopefully, that'll be the last disruption." What she didn't know was that every word she'd spoken in the cabin, every moment of her posture, her tone, her actions, had all been recorded by an internal audio system for flight operations review. Standard practice on high-tier commercial routes. And Marcus knew it. Outside, just beyond the boarding bridge, Marcus stood motionless beside the officer. But inside his mind, every detail clicked into place. The look on Rebecca's face, the way she'd zeroed in on him, the deliberate escalation, the young woman who had recorded the moment, the flight attendant who had flinched when his daughter's note hit the floor. They had made a crucial mistake. He had always known how quickly perception could become prosecution, but what Rebecca and her cohorts failed to realize was that he had never walked into a battlefield without allies. As the officer dismissed himself with a stiff nod, Marcus didn't waste another second. He pulled out his phone, tapped a locked app, and after a biometric scan, the screen opened to a secured contact list. He selected the line marked Anderson Group Legal Chairman line and brought the phone to his ear. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and low, but carried the weight of finality. "This is Harris," he said. "I'm in play. Flight 716. Civil Procedure Escalation Protocol. Activate all privacy waivers. Flag incident with DOT and internal counsel. I want all recorded cabin data pulled the moment we land. Video, audio, flight crew logs, everything. And prep the holding complaint for prejudicial conduct. We'll be naming names. A pause, then a slight nod. Good. Send the brief to Sarah and have her hold the NDA clause for leverage. He ended the call without waiting for acknowledgement, then locked his phone and turned slowly to re-enter the aircraft. Behind him, the security officer hesitated for a second, then looked away. He'd heard enough to know this wasn't just another angry passenger making idle threats. This man had reach. Marcus stepped back into first class like a chess master returning to a pause game, aware now of every move on the board. The murmurs returned instantly. Some passengers looked down, some looked away, and some, like Daniel, watched with new respect, but none more attentively than Rebecca, who stood stiffly near the galley. As Marcus passed her, he made no attempt to speak, no glance in her direction. He didn't need to. He had already started something far more damning than any verbal retaliation. But Rebecca, unaware of what she had just triggered, turned to her fellow attendant and whispered with a smirk, "What's he gonna do? Call his TikTok lawyer? Please." The junior attendant chuckled nervously, but a few feet behind them, Grace caught a glimpse of Marcus's phone screen just before it darkened, and her breath caught in her throat. She had seen that name before, Anderson Group Legal, the top-tier litigation firm used by 3 Fortune 100 companies, and known for burying airlines in settlements and reputation damage. And the line name, Chairman. Grace froze. She realized then that Marcus Harris wasn't just another businessman. He was someone connected, deeply, strategically. Marcus returned to his seat, collected the items still resting there, including the drawing from Jada, now placed respectfully on top, and sat down with quiet purpose. His fingers moved swiftly on his phone again, this time opening a folder labeled CR-19 Flight Protocols, and began logging timestamps, faces, quotes. Meanwhile, in the crew area, Grace approached Rebecca with hesitant urgency. "We need to talk," she whispered. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "That man," Grace said, voice barely audible. "He just called Anderson Group Legal. You know what that means, right?" Rebecca rolled her eyes. "It means he knows someone who knows someone. We see it all the time. Empty threats. He'll calm down after a drink and a free voucher." But Grace didn't believe that anymore. The weight of what she participated in, what she hadn't stopped, now pulled at her like gravity. "He wasn't bluffing," she said. "You need to tell the captain." Rebecca scoffed. "Tell the captain what? That I asked a man to show his ticket and he got upset? That I followed up on a theft report? I followed policy." "You went after him based on nothing," Grace snapped, then lowered her voice as a passenger passed by. "And if legal gets involved, it's not going to stop with you." Rebecca's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned away, reaching for her tablet with shaking fingers she tried to steady. Meanwhile, Daniel tapped out another email, this time CCNG, his firm's internal equity committee. The man in 3A, now suddenly quiet, pretended to read, though he hadn't turned a page in minutes. The atmosphere in first class had changed yet again, but this time it wasn't pity or smug superiority. Rebecca stood near the galley, gripping her tablet tighter than necessary, stealing glances toward Marcus, but refusing to meet his eyes. Grace lingered a few steps behind her, biting the inside of her cheek, glancing between passengers like someone waiting for a bomb to go off. Marcus sat still, arms folded, staring out the window, his phone now resting in his lap with the screen locked, but recording audio via a discreet, legally configured app tied to his firm's internal documentation protocol. Then it happened. The cockpit door opened. Something that rarely occurred after boarding was complete. The captain stepped out, Captain Ray Delaney, a seasoned pilot known for being unshakable even during emergency landings. He looked shaken. Following closely behind him was a young operations officer in an airport badge vest, breathless and visibly flustered. He leaned in and whispered something into the captain's ear. Words so low only fragments reached the first row. "Legal. Incoming. Corporate line. Direct order." The captain's head turned toward Marcus, slowly, eyes narrowing, not in suspicion, but confusion. Recognition. The name had just dropped, and it meant something. Delaney straightened, gave a short nod to the op staffer, then approached Rebecca with calm authority. "Summers, may I speak to you for a moment?" Rebecca blinked, her composure wobbling. "Sir." "Now," he said firmly. He pulled her aside near the front cabin wall and spoke in low, deliberate tones. Passengers nearby pretended not to listen, but their postures shifted forward unconsciously, ears straining. Grace stood frozen, not daring to move. Rebecca's face drained as she listened. She opened her mouth to speak, but was cut off with a subtle shake of Delaney's head. He stepped past her, walked directly to Marcus, and cleared his throat. "Mr. Harris," he said quietly, "I've been informed that your presence on this flight carries additional significance. On behalf of the airline, allow me to personally apologize for any inconvenience or disrespect you've encountered." Marcus didn't stand. He didn't smile. He simply looked up, calm as ever. "I appreciate that, Captain, but apologies mean nothing without follow-through." Delaney nodded once. "Understood. Please make yourself comfortable. We're working to address the situation immediately." As the captain turned and returned to the cockpit, several passengers began whispering more openly now. The woman from 1B turned to her husband and murmured, "What's going on?" He shrugged, wide-eyed. In the aisle, Grace slowly exhaled for the first time in 10 minutes. But the real shift came moments later when the aircraft door reopened. A rare and dramatic gesture that never happened once a plane had pushed back from the gate. Gasps fluttered through the cabin. Everyone turned. A tall man in a tailored Navy suit stepped on board, holding a slim leather folder and wearing a Skylux Airlines lapel pin. His face was pale, and his steps were purposeful. This was not standard crew. This was the airline's director of communications, Brendan Ellis, who rarely appeared in front of passengers unless damage control was required. He made eye contact with no one as he stepped forward. His eyes scanned the cabin, landed on Marcus, and widened slightly before his expression reassembled into something more professional. He leaned toward the lead flight attendant, now standing rigid, and whispered something urgent. Rebecca's face, already pale, flushed beet red. "You didn't know who he was?" Brendan hissed, just loud enough for Grace to hear. "You initiated an accusation on a verified shareholder?" Grace closed her eyes. Marcus remained seated, unmoving, letting the chaos swirl around him. He didn't need to speak. He was watching them unravel. Rebecca turned, her mouth opening, but Brendan raised a hand. "Not another word. Go to the galley. Now." She obeyed, legs stiff, lips pressed in. Brendan approached Marcus, trying to offer a reassuring smile. "Mr. Harris, we're aware this has escalated far beyond what it should have. Corporate has authorized me to remain on board through takeoff to ensure any and all concerns are addressed appropriately." Marcus looked at him, not coldly, but with unmistakable expectation. "You're one mistake too late," he said. "Now you can sit and watch what accountability looks like." Brendan nodded. "Understood." Brendan Ellis, still seated in the jump seat near the galley, kept glancing toward Marcus every few seconds, as if awaiting instruction from a judge. Grace moved carefully through the cabin, her every movement measured, hands slightly trembling as she poured water and offered forced smiles. No one was relaxed now. First class had transformed into a courtroom, and the verdict was slowly assembling itself in whispers, in posture, in breath. Then, with perfect timing and no warning, Marcus stood. The seatbelt light was off. The plane hadn't taken off yet. All eyes turned to him like gravity. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and removed a slim, dark leather wallet. With deliberate motion, he flipped it open and removed a black card, not a credit card, but a heavy metallic business ID with gold etching and a subtle logo in the corner. He held it up between his fingers for only those nearby to see, then placed it gently on the armrest where it gleamed under the overhead light. The card read, Marcus D. Harris, Chairman, Strategic Equity Board, Skybridge Aviation Holdings. There was no explanation offered. None was needed. Within 10 seconds, Grace saw it and inhaled sharply. Brendan saw it and visibly swallowed. A murmur ran through the passengers nearest the front, and one man 2 rows back leaned sideways to read the card. His eyebrows climbed. Someone whispered, "Wait." He's not just a shareholder. He's the one that owns the board seat. Another voice added, Skybridge. That's the holding company for this airline. The information spread like wildfire through a dry forest. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't smile. He didn't grandstand. He simply looked to the front of the cabin and said, I'll be needing a printout of employee conduct logs from the last 2 months, as well as an updated incident report for today's flight, submitted to oversight within 24 hours. Brendan nodded immediately. Yes, sir. I'll handle it personally. Not personally, Marcus corrected. Officially. This isn't a PR mess. It's an audit. And it was overdue. From the galley, Rebecca, who had been listening while pretending not to, stepped forward with an awkward half-step as if to interject. Mr. Harris, she began, I wasn't aware. Exactly. Marcus interrupted without looking at her. You weren't aware. You acted on instinct, assumption, and unchecked bias. That's why I'm here. That's why this isn't just about me. It's about every passenger like me who flies with your crew and leaves the flight with fewer rights than they boarded with. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried like thunder. Rebecca froze, her lips parting slightly before closing again, wordless. Grace looked down. Brendan turned toward the cockpit and made a quick gesture to the captain. Stay put. Don't move. This isn't your lane. Marcus continued, still standing. I've been gathering data for over 6 months. Complaints, incident trends, anonymous surveys from staff. What I needed was one moment, one live, observable example to finalize the case. He turned now and looked directly at Rebecca, who had turned a shade paler than her uniform blouse. You provided it. Efficiently. The silence that followed was suffocating. Not a whisper stirred. No one adjusted their seat. It was the kind of stillness that only came when truth arrived and took all the air with it. I didn't mean, Rebecca began again, but her voice cracked. But you did, Marcus said, still calm. And that's the point. Intent doesn't erase impact. He picked up his card, slid it back into his wallet, and returned to his seat with the same quiet precision that had marked his entire journey so far. He didn't recline. He didn't gloat. He simply opened his phone and began typing again, this time an internal message to the oversight board. Subject: Field verification completed. Brendan, now fully aware that any misstep could cost him more than just reputation, walked slowly down the aisle and whispered to the flight attendant managing the boarding door. Keep it open, he said. Legal may want to board before takeoff. The attendant blinked, but nodded. In the back row of first class, the smirking man from earlier sat very still, his hands clenched in his lap. He looked straight ahead and said nothing. Even the woman from 1C, who'd reported the missing, watch suddenly found the nerve to sink lower in her seat. He had not spoken again since revealing who he was, but the silence around him was not passive. It was anticipation held on a wire. In the galley, Brendan Ellis whispered frantically into a secured comms device, patching into Skylux's operations hub. I want internal surveillance access, forward cabin, galley, crew mic audio from the last 45 minutes. Yes, everything. The response on the other end was urgent. We already flagged the recording after Harris's call. It's queued. Legal said we can stream it through your onboard display if you give the word. Brendan paused, looked at the captain, who now stood quietly at the edge of the cockpit. Marcus gave no indication he was aware of any of this, though everyone could feel his presence like heat. Brendan finally nodded and muttered, Do it. Let them all see it. Seconds later, the seatback screens in first class flickered. Passengers looked around, confused at first, until the words crew surveillance, forward cabin feed appeared in bold type. Then the footage rolled. First, there was audio, clear, crisp, and damning. Rebecca's voice played out over the speakers. I don't care if he has a ticket. He's not the kind of guy that sits here. A passenger gasped. Then her face appeared on screen, standing just inside the galley, her expression taut, her words unmistakable. He's too confident, too polished. I don't trust it. The video showed her walking toward Marcus, stopping beside his seat, asking for his boarding pass when she had already verified other passengers without question. Then came the clip of her, in the crew area, whispering to Grace, "Just stall him. Make it look official. If we find something, fine. If not, at least he'll think twice next time." Grace, visibly uncomfortable, tried to interject, but Rebecca waved her off. The footage didn't just confirm Marcus's story. It validated every second of humiliation, every unjustified action taken against him. And it exposed motive. The screens froze on the image of Rebecca's face mid-sentence, lips curled in disdain. Then they went black. The silence that followed was volcanic. It wasn't just awkward. It was explosive, contained only by the collective awareness that they had all just watched a truth too blatant to ignore. Brendan stepped forward, his face chalk white, his voice barely controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, but Marcus raised a hand. Brendan stopped mid-sentence. Marcus stood, turned slowly, and addressed the cabin, not with fury, but with calm finality. "What you just saw is not new," he said. "It didn't start with me, and it doesn't end with her. But today it changes." His eyes swept the cabin. Every face was turned toward him. "I came here today not just as a passenger, not just as an investor. I came as an observer. Because we've been receiving complaints for months. Small things, quiet things, things easy to ignore unless you've lived them. Profiling, discretionary targeting, selective courtesy. What you saw was not an isolated act. It's part of a pattern, a culture." He paused, letting the words settle like ash. "As of this moment, I'm submitting a formal recommendation to remove any staff whose conduct has violated our equity code. That recommendation begins with Rebecca Summers." At her name, Rebecca, still standing near the galley, visibly flinched. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the handle of a drawer for balance. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "we'll be launching a full investigation into training protocols, internal response mechanisms, and accountability frameworks. Because no passenger, black, brown, young, old, should ever have to defend their right to belong on a flight they paid for." He turned to Brendan. "Public acknowledgement of this incident will be handled by corporate within 24 hours. I want a recorded apology issued not just to me, but to every passenger on this plane who witnessed what bias looks like when it thinks no one important is watching." Brendan nodded stiffly, his throat working through a dry swallow. "Yes, sir. I'll have it prepared before landing." "No," Marcus said. "I'll write it. You'll approve it, and the board will stand behind every word." No one moved. No one spoke. Even the smirking man in 3A sat now like a schoolboy caught cheating on an exam, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. Rebecca stood rooted to the floor, her jaw twitching, eyes glistening but lips sealed shut. Grace, tears now threatening to spill, whispered a thank you as Marcus passed. The silence that followed Marcus's final words wasn't empty. It was loaded, decisive, the kind that reshapes a room. Brendan Ellis remained frozen for a moment, then raised his hand to his earpiece and spoke into the internal line with a level of clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. "Confirmed Directive Alpha. Immediate crew removal. Acknowledge authority. Skybridge Holdings." Seconds later, the cockpit door opened again, and Captain Delaney stepped into the aisle, his face unreadable, but his movements direct. He walked straight to Rebecca, whose posture stiffened the moment she realized he was approaching. "MS. Summers," he said calmly, though his tone cut like a razor. "Under executive directive, your employment with Skylux Airlines has been terminated effective immediately. You are to disembark this aircraft under escort." She blinked once, as if still processing the words, then twice. Her hand went slowly to her name badge. No protests, no pleas, only the quiet fumbling of a person watching their illusion of control evaporate in real time. Her voice, once confident and commanding, didn't dare surface now. Two ground agents entered through the boarding bridge, approaching with calm efficiency. Rebecca lowered her eyes, collected what little dignity she had left, and walked down the aisle in silence, flanked on either side, her exit punctuated by the sound of the cabin door hissing shut behind her. No applause followed, no jeers, just a heavy, collective recognition that justice, in some form, had finally arrived. Moments later, a new voice echoed through the intercom, neutral, composed, and unfamiliar. Dear passengers, to ensure full transparency, Skylux Airlines will be sending each of you a digital incident form to report your observations during the earlier events. All submissions will go directly to the oversight board. The passengers shifted, nodding, murmuring their approvals. Some, like Daniel Tran, opened their devices immediately, already drafting statements. Others sat back, thoughtful. Everyone had witnessed something worth remembering. Brendan, still standing near the galley, now approached Marcus with a sealed envelope in hand. His face was pale, his movements careful. "Mr. Harris," he said quietly, "per corporate legal and equity resolution protocols, this contains a certified acknowledgement of incident and a formal offer of compensation for damages endured, both reputational and procedural. The agreed figure is $750,000, processed in full upon arrival." Marcus took the envelope without looking at it, placed it gently on his tray table, then turned his head just enough to meet Brendan's eyes. "Send it to the Freedom to Move Foundation," he said. "Every penny. Mark it as a direct grant, anonymously if you want, but it goes there, not here." Brendan hesitated. "You don't want it for yourself?" Marcus shook his head once. "I didn't come here for a check. I came for change." Brendan nodded slowly. "Understood. I'll see to it personally." Behind him, a quiet wave of acknowledgement rolled through the cabin. One passenger gave a soft, respectful clap. Another murmured, "That's real leadership." Even the man in 3A, whose earlier smirk had long since disappeared, now sat with folded hands and a face flushed with something dangerously close to shame. In the rear of first class, Grace approached cautiously, holding a fresh glass of water with both hands. She placed it on Marcus's table and looked at him with a sincerity that cut through the formalities. "Thank you," she said gently, "for not staying silent." Marcus gave a small nod, not out of ego, but out of principle. He didn't do this for applause. He did it for the next Marcus, who boarded a plane and deserved not to be profiled. For the next traveler whose ticket should guarantee a seat, not a scene. Over the intercom, the captain announced that the aircraft would begin taxiing in moments, and a new kind of quiet settled in. Not heavy like before, lighter, clearer, as if the very air had shifted. This flight was no longer about reaching a destination. It had already arrived somewhere more important. 3 weeks after Flight 716 landed, the incident had spread far beyond the runway. The video footage, once contained within an aircraft cabin, had leaked across every major platform. News cycles, think pieces, panel debates, and social media campaigns, all ignited by the same 10 minutes of prejudice and consequence. Rebecca Summers became the name attached to every headline that began with the words "Flight Attendant Fired After Racial Profiling Incident." Her face, frozen in a scowl on the in-flight security cam, was now a cautionary symbol. Job offers vanished overnight. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Anonymous hate mail flooded her inbox. And yet, despite the noise and disgrace, the person she had wronged the most never once added to the pile. Marcus Harris never gave another public statement after the formal press release. He declined interviews. He avoided the camera. What he did instead was send a handwritten letter. No cameras, no signature block, just his words in his penmanship, folded neatly inside an unbranded envelope delivered to Rebecca's temporary address. In it, he wrote, "You misjudged me, but I won't do the same to you. Consequences were necessary, but cruelty is not justice. If you're ready to unlearn and rebuild, there's a program I help fund for professionals recovering from bias-driven misconduct. It's rigorous, it's uncomfortable, but it leads somewhere better. You're invited if you want to begin again." There were no demands, no expectations, just a choice. Rebecca sat with that letter for hours. At first, she resented it. Then she feared it. Then, she saw it for what it was, a door not everyone gets after a fall. She enrolled in the program 3 days later. The following months were not easy. She endured workshops, simulations, role reversals, Hours of uncomfortable confrontation with her own habits, her upbringing, and her worldview. She cried during peer reviews. She walked out of sessions more than once, but she always came back. And somewhere along the way, she stopped defending herself and started listening. Meanwhile, Skylux Airlines underwent sweeping changes. Marcus's report became the framework for a new corporate equity division. Grace, inspired by what she had witnessed and the courage she had mustered to speak the truth, applied for a transfer and was soon offered a role in that very department as a junior officer for inclusion and training oversight. She accepted without hesitation. Flight crews across the nation began receiving new modules, policies were rewritten, and anonymous complaint systems were implemented with direct access to third-party review boards. Marcus didn't need a title to lead the change. He had written it into the foundation. A year later, in a modest conference center in Chicago, the Global Equity in Aviation Summit gathered a crowd of leaders, employees, advocates, and skeptics. Grace stood near the stage, wearing a name badge that read Grace Dalton Equity Officer, Skylux, her hands slightly shaking as she looked over her opening remarks. The final speaker on the docket was a woman no one had expected, introduced without fanfare by a host who simply said, "Our final speaker brings a story of consequence, correction, and growth. Please welcome Rebecca Summers." She stepped onto the stage in a simple gray blazer, no designer pins, no scripted PR polish. Her hair was tied back, her voice clear but not forceful. She didn't read from a teleprompter. She didn't hide behind safe language. She said, "My name is Rebecca, and I'm here because I failed, not just as a professional, as a person. But someone gave me the chance to do the hardest thing, face myself honestly, and begin again." She paused, looking directly at Grace in the front row. This journey wasn't about saving a job. It was about becoming someone who doesn't need that job to matter. Applause came slowly, then built into something powerful, not because she had perfected her redemption, but because she had earned the right to tell the story. After the session, Grace approached her. They hugged, not awkwardly, but meaningfully, as two people who had survived the same storm from opposite ends. Outside, the air was crisp. Marcus didn't attend the event. He didn't need to. He was in New York that day, walking his daughter Jada to school. As they passed a newsstand, he spotted a headline in a side column. "Former flight attendant speaks on bias, credits Second Chance as turning point." He smiled faintly, adjusted Jada's backpack, and said, "Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you to class." She looked up at him and asked, "Daddy, did you help her?" Marcus paused, then replied, "Maybe, but only because she chose to help herself." And with that, they walked forward, leaving behind a story of injustice not just answered, but transformed. The end. If this story moved you or made you think, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful narratives like this one. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments and tell us, what part of the story hit you the hardest? Was it the turning point, the reveal, or the final act of redemption? We'd love to hear your thoughts.